they saw these massive opportunity pipelines, but the reality of it was that they weren't closing almost anything. So when it comes to talking about Salesforce opportunities, there's a lot of clarity with what is a Salesforce opportunity. I mean, by Salesforce definition, a Salesforce opportunity is a deal that's currently in progress. And that sounds very straightforward, but it's kind of funny that in my years as a consultant, I've ran into several scenarios where I've seen customers use opportunities in some creative ways. So this is a video compilation with 3 interesting stories of what definitely isn't a Salesforce opportunity. About 4 years ago, we got involved with working with a client that was using Salesforce, and they were managing opportunities in a very creative way. And while they certainly understood when to create an opportunity, the issue with how they were managing it was more so of when to close an opportunity. And by definition, once you close an opportunity or once you sign a contract, your deal is done. The opportunity is closed, won, and any information that follows should be managed under a contract or any other object depending on what the particular need is. But they decided to continue to work on the opportunity itself. So their opportunity stages had all of the standard pipeline stages and then had closed one in about 4 or 5 different stages after that. And that was creating a lot of confusion for them, particularly because a lot of times they wanted to be able to track any upsells or do reporting on if they were able to upsell more features on their services or new services to these particular customers, and because everything was sitting on the same opportunity, they simply weren't able to do so. And if they were to add opportunity products into the existing opportunity that's already been closed won for God knows how long, then the challenge was going to be that you just didn't know when you had upsold that to them. So there was a lot of confusion that was happening there. And to put a cherry on top of the whole story, a lot of times they were managing multiple locations for each customer. So every now and then they would have to add on or onboard more locations, which would increase the contract size, and they were still managing everything under the very same opportunity. So every account, for all intents and purposes, would have no more than one opportunity in their current system. And it took them a little while to be able to organize themselves, and we try to assist them as best as we can, and we got them to switch it over, and things have been a lot cleaner now. But it was definitely an interesting story about how not to use opportunities and when to start looking at closing the opportunities and calling it a day. So the next story, which was kind of interesting with how we were organizing everything, came from a client that was about as recent as a year and a half ago, and the opposite situation was what we encountered, because when to create an opportunity was also a big question of how to manage their leads and their processes in Salesforce. And their biggest issue with this particular client was that here's a client that only serves the Fortune 1000 companies. They only want to deal with companies that are very, very high volume in online sales and positioned in certain parts of the world. And one of the biggest challenges that they had was how to track the activities on these top 40 or top 50 accounts that they wanted to get in with or get in the door with. And one of the biggest challenges that I saw when I came in was that they had created opportunities for all of these top 40 accounts, and the reality of it is that they weren't talking to any of them. These opportunities just became placeholders to kind of manage the activities of outreaches and trying to get in front of them, whether it's through a trade show, whether it's just get a phone call or demo, whatever the situation is. Almost all of these top 40 accounts had no active deal going on. So the reality of it was that they were just placing these opportunities in there, putting a opportunity amount number for what they could only imagine the opportunity would be for if they were to ever engage and close the deal. And what resulted was that they were inflating the pipeline by an insane margin because simply they had all of these deals that weren't true. And the issue for everyone that was reporting on it was that they saw these massive opportunity pipelines, but the reality of it was that they weren't closing almost anything. And what was happening was that every couple of months or every quarter or so, they would just keep kicking the close date further down for these opportunities that never really existed. So The reality of it is that for a company to understand how to use opportunities is that, yes, it's as simple as saying when you have an active deal, but the definition of an active deal goes hand in hand with the definition of a sales qualified lead, which is an SQL. Which the reality of an SQL is, has the customer came back and said, I'm interested, tell me more. Because if you haven't yet, you may have a marketing qualified lead, which is someone that meets your demographic of who you want to do business with. In this case, that was certainly true. If you look at it, these were the top 40 accounts that they carefully looked at to make sure that they were in the geography that they were interested in doing business with, that did the amount of business in online sales that they wanted to target. So certainly a marketing qualified lead, because by definition, they knew they wanted to do business with them, whether it was tomorrow or 10 years from now. So they were very laser focused on that. But they definitely didn't have a sales qualified lead, which was someone who came back and said, yeah, I'm interested, tell me more, or we're looking to find a new vendor, tell me more about your products and services. So in that particular case, if you don't have an active deal, then you want to track all of your activities under a prospect account, but keep your opportunities from being created at that point, because it's just going to run a risk of inflating your pipeline and creating a lot of confusion for those who depend on the reports and dashboards to get an accurate picture of what your organization's pipeline really looks like. And the final story that I really have to share with you guys is a company that was struggling a little bit because of recurring revenue. So this was an interesting one, and this was about 4 or 5 years ago when we got engaged with this organization that had these account managers, and let's just say it was a bunch of team members or account executives that weren't so technologically inclined. So what ended up transpiring was that they hired a person, and bless her soul, but this sales operations admin, her job was literally just to enter in Salesforce information that the account executives didn't want to do. And in trying to figure out a lot of the complexities or trying to self-understand how to best leverage opportunities, one of the biggest challenges came when they were trying to recognize recurring revenue. And if you had a $120,000 deal that you were locking in today, what you wanted to see was that you wanted to track that monthly revenue that you would get, which would be the 10,000 you'd get every month, or the 30,000 you would get every quarter, however it is that you're organizing yourselves. And the way that they found to manage this, to properly report on it, was that this sales operations admin had to basically change the opportunity amount from the 120,000 to 10,000, and then clone the opportunity 11 other times, changing the close date on every single occasion to match the corresponding month so their reporting would look accurate, which for anyone that knows Salesforce knows this is ridiculous. And it's a shame that it took them so long to kind of work this one out, because it was a lot of messy data that had to be cleaned up. And as we got a chance to audit the system, we really saw that possibility for a ton of issues, because we were finding opportunities that sometimes there would be the original amount would still remain on the first month, so you would have a $120,000 opportunity, and then another 11 that followed that would be $10,000 each. There would also be a lot of confusion that sometimes they had cloned for a quarter, but then they meant monthly, and then a quarterly representing opportunity wasn't deleted, or whatever the case may be. And it was just so much manual work that it blew my mind away that nobody had thought to raise their hands and say, is this really the best way that we should be doing this any sooner? Because they really went this way for several years before they decided to look into doing things differently. The reality of it is that if you're managing recurring revenue on your system, then you should really be looking at features like revenue scheduling. Now granted, anybody that's worked with revenue scheduling, I'll be one of the first ones to say there are limitations to revenue scheduling. It's a great basic feature, but even custom functionality that you can build wouldn't be too hard to put together to be able to do your recurring revenue for your opportunities. That way you can report on the deal as a whole when you sign it, or be able to report on the recurring revenue that that deal is going to bring in every month that follows. So the final story that I want to talk about is a customer that was probably about 1 to 2 years ago, And one of their largest challenges was, again, with opportunity pipeline and reporting, because one of the things that they were doing was that they often offered 3 or 4 different options for a potential customer. And their way of kind of dealing with that was to create multiple opportunities for that same person, covering all of the different options. And if it's not obvious by now, then those multiple options definitely are not an opportunity, because if you have an opportunity that, let's just say, between the cheapest and the most expensive option is anywhere between $10,000 to $20,000, then the reality of it is that your real opportunity amount is somewhere in the middle, which is about $15,000. But because they were creating options for $10,000, $15,000, and $20,000, the sum of the three were adding up to about $45,000, if my math is correct. And the reality of it is that you don't have $45,000 in your pipeline, because in the best of scenarios, you're really only gonna close $20,000. So on that, companies should look into using the quote functionality in Salesforce, which is a fantastic tool to be able to get you going, and it sets the table for many better things to come later in the future if you ever want to get involved with complex contracting, and you can set up CPQ, because that is the door to many, many scalable features later down the road. But most importantly, quotes allow you to create multiple different variations of what an opportunity is going to be, and it allows you to sync the quote that ultimately gets selected into the opportunity, so that way your opportunity synchronizes immediately. The final benefit of that is that you get the ability to keep your opportunity pipeline reporting fairly consistent with the reality of what you're likely going to close, and the reality of what you really have open presently in your organization. And the final bonus actually of using quotes is that they even have a PDF generator, which allows you to create different quotes. It's very basic, sure, but I've seen a lot of companies use it, and the ease of use in setting up the templates is definitely a big plus, because you can email those PDFs right out of the box. So those are some of my stories that I've come across with how people were using opportunities in the term of what definitely shouldn't be opportunities. I'm curious to hear if you've had some yourself. Please feel free to make some comments below. I'd love to hear what you have to share. If not, make sure to like and subscribe so that way you can be alerted when the next video drops.